Is it time?
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
We'll know in a very short period of time, but it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good.
I see issue with that. And again, hey.
You're not going to be able to insult your way to the presidency. That's not going to happen.
I don't know who created Pokemon Go, but I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokemon go to the polls.
I'm Ted Cruz, and my pronoun is kiss my ass.
So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires, what we need to do to create these jobs.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to put him
not good. Believe me, not good.
Hello, dissidents. Welcome one and all to a special presentation of the Do Dissidents podcast. Kind of, not really a podcast tonight. This is kind of a screening room this evening. Keaton Weiss here with Russell Dibular, of course.
Hello.
All righty. So, folks, we got a special presentation, like I said, for you all tonight. Glad you could all make it here. Please smash that like button hit that subscribe button, tweet this out, share this stream, and let's get a crowd in here for The Second Cooler, which is an award-winning documentary which asks the question, who benefits from mass migration? And this is a film that was made by our friend. Her name is Ellin Jimmerson. Most of you guys know who she is. She made this film back in 2013. And it's amazing when you look back at this film, how much of this debate around this issue has changed and how much has stayed the same. And so we're going to bring her in after the screening. So we have the director of the film, our friend Ellin Jimmerson, and we also have Todd Miller, who is a journalist who has specialized in immigration and border issues for over a decade. And so we are going to have a little talk back after the screening, a little interview. We'll take some questions for the chat if you guys got them. But this film runs about 80 minutes. It's a really powerful film. We screened it on this channel about 2 years ago, back when we had a very, very tiny little subscriber base. And so we thought, given that this issue was so front and center this campaign season, and given that the Democrats basically adopted the Republicans' position on the issue, and the debate on this issue has really been almost non-existent this year, seeing that Trump's position on border issues has sort of become the center, we thought it would be a good time as the Trump term 2 gets ready to take off to show this and talk about the film and talk about this issue a bit. So this is a sort of special presentation. Russell, any thoughts before we start?
Bringing drugs, they're bringing crime.
Yeah, right.
And some of them, I assume, are good people.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Somebody says in the chat, Russ didn't pay his electric bill. No.
I'm in my office. I'm not in my studio.
Yeah, because we have to actually prep tomorrow's show while the movie plays, some of it. So we're going to be going back and forth because we've seen the movie. I watched the movie just a few days ago to get a sort of refresher on it, so that's why Russ has moved around. So don't worry, he's up to date. He's up to date. You guys keep those super chats coming in, so he's fine. He's fine. They will not turn the lights off on him.
It has been a very, very long time since I've had Con Ed come to my building and shut the power.
Yeah, shut the power off. Yeah,
I think I was in my 20s the last time that happened.
That sucks. Yeah, that is rough. That is rough stuff. But yeah, we're gonna start the film right about now, and then we will see you guys for the Q&A. Oh, should we announce tomorrow's show? We should probably plug that. We're gonna be having Jimmy Dore on the show tomorrow to talk about the TYT post-election pivot. That's fun stuff. That's pretty juicy, as well as some other issues. So that's gonna be a special episode tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern, regular time. Oh, my dog's asking to go out. I'll take her out once the movie begins. All righty, everybody. Well, we thank you very, very much for being here. We're really excited to share this film with you. It's a really, really powerful film. It's about 80 minutes, and then we will see you afterwards for the talkback. So sit back, relax, and enjoy The Second Cooler. Russ, why don't we just mute our mics before we forget? All righty, folks. Enjoy.
There are approximately 12 million migrants in the United States illegally. Why do they come? Are they caught up in a system that is fully apparent neither to them nor to us? Are U.S. citizens innocent bystanders? Are U.S. citizens caught up in the same system? Who benefits?
was life like in Michoacán?
Muy bonita. Y nos la pasábamos siempre juntos. Toda la familia convivíamos. Pues ahora es diferente. Ahora
Why have millions of Latin Americans left their homes and families to make an illegal, expensive, dangerous, and sometimes deadly journey north? Americans are not innocent bystanders to the outpouring of illegal Latin American migrants. The cumulative effect of nearly 2 centuries of U.S. economic and foreign policies have contributed to the massive poverty and limited access to power of the people of Latin America.
For a number of reasons, Central America was not incorporated into the United States formally in the 1850s, say. And there's a fascinating history there because a lot of the issue of whether they would come in as slave-owning or non-slave-owning states. And so it was just clearly it wasn't going to happen. What's emerged instead is this much more complicated system through which this very, very powerful country to the north finds various ways to dominate these small Central American countries. If you look carefully at the cases, there's some pretty clear cases of U.S. domination and of just comprehensive violation of the sovereignty of these countries.
It's very important to keep in mind that today the U.S. Southwest was effectively stolen. I mean, first and foremost, it was stolen from the indigenous population, but it was also land that was effectively stolen from Mexico through the U.S.-Mexico War of 1846 to 1848, through which the United States effectively coerced Mexico into ceding what was then about 40% of Mexican territory. What the United States stole wasn't only the land, but all the rights that went with it.
This did not happen in a random, unintended way. There is a history of unequal relations between the United States and Latin America, and especially Mexico and Central America. On the one hand, there's a history of unequal economic relations that have put these Latin American countries in an economic rut that has led them to kind of an unequal and highly exploitative system that leaves them forever dependent and subordinate to the more prosperous industrialized worlds. On the other hand, there are intentional policies by the United States, policies of intervention, policies of human rights violations that the U.S. has either directly participated in or supported that has furthered this relationship of dominance and subordination.
Is the United States' increasingly rigid demarcation line fundamentally about promoting national security and the rule of law? Or is it fundamentally about cosmopolitan class privilege, no-holds-barred capitalism, and global apartheid?
Si estuviera en mis manos poder hacer cruzar a mi presidente por el desierto y sufrir uno de todos los atropellos que sufren los mexicanos cuando cruzan por ahí, creo que sería una buena idea.
In a few moments, I will sign the North American Free Trade Act into law. NAFTA will tear down trade barriers between our three nations. It will create the world's largest trade zone and create 200,000 jobs in this country.
In 1992, Canada, the United States, and Mexico entered into the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. Signed by Canada's Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, America's President Bill Clinton, and Mexico's President Carlos Salinas, The purpose of the agreement was to facilitate the free flow of goods and capital across North American borders and open up markets to corporate producers. NAFTA was intended to create corporate wealth. In that, it has been successful. Changes to the system, or reforms as NAFTA's proponents called them, were made in three broad sectors: autos, energy, and agriculture. According to people who analyze NAFTA from the perspective of small traditional Mexican farmers, NAFTA has caused catastrophic suffering.
The problems that NAFTA has built on in Mexico and in Central America is one of extreme inequality. The levels of extreme inequality in Mexico and Central America have grown since the passage of NAFTA. And that extreme inequality is fundamental to the process of migration that we're looking at.
If you ask an economic migrant, if you had those opportunities in Mexico, would you come to the United States? The majority of them will say, absolutely not.
No hay para ganar un poco de dinero, pues no hay nada, nada más se siembra maíz y frijol, nada más eso se siembra pues para comer, para un poco para, o sea, pues si me gano un poco maíz, pero se vende como 10, 15 kilos, pero para comprar un.
NAFTA lifted tariffs U.S. corporate producers have to pay to export corn, beans, and other crops to Mexico. This allowed them to undersell traditional farmers. In addition to NAFTA's lifting of tariffs, President Salinas repealed Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution, which had provided Mexican farmers with subsidies.
Uno de los problemas graves que han tenido los pequeños productores en México ha sido la privatización de la tierra, que tiene y está relacionada con NAFTA, con el Tratado de Libre Comercio. Cuando se privatiza la tierra a través del artículo 27, muchos de los agricultores, muchos de los ejidatarios perdieron sus derechos comunitarios.
Figures vary, but many analysts conclude that NAFTA has pushed at least 1.5 million peasants, many of whom were in the corn and bean sectors of the Mexican agricultural economy, over the edge financially. NAFTA forced these peasants off their lands and into migration.
Están exigiendo una tierra, unos ejidatarios, y no les daban. Uno de tan impotente se quemó, y después murió. Porque la protesta es seria, la protesta, que nadie le hace caso. Entonces han llegado hasta el extremo de prenderse fuego para ver si le hacen caso.
The figure of peasants that have been displaced and indigenous peoples displaced because of the passing of NAFTA is a scandalously high number.
Bueno, es difícil saber cuánta gente ha sido desplazada del sector rural debido a las diferentes presiones, el Tratado de Libre Comercio, artículo 27, etcétera, pero se podría hablar de por lo menos 1 millón, 2 millones de personas.
The government understood at the time they signed it that they were signing away life rights for a large part of its rural population. It wasn't a surprise for the government leaders, and it wasn't a surprise for the peasantry.
What happened is that small farmers just got swept away.
The people who are hungriest, the poorest, have least access to jobs, who no longer can sell the small subsistence crops that they've been raising, are those that are forced to migrate. They have no other alternative.
The result is the same on both sides of the border, and that is that the elites benefit enormously. The folks who already have the educational opportunities and already have the wealth and already have the power, their wealth and power is enhanced dramatically, and and the poor are the ones who are excluded, and the middle class is squeezed.
We can't have our cake and eat it too. We can't have a global political economy that helps drive people from their homelands, right? And then deny them the right to come to places where they're able to achieve the livelihoods that have been denied to them, in large part because of our actions, right? The only way we can do that is by being morally corrupt. And that's what the system of global apartheid is. It's morally corrupt.
They had hired me as a consultant for insulation down there. They hired me at $46 an hour plus all my expenses. And the people that I were training down there made $5 a day.
A los 14 años comencé a trabajar en maquiladora. Tuve que salirme de la escuela porque la economía empezó a bajar en México. Mi mamá empezó a tener problemas de salud. Entonces todos mis hermanos decidimos salir a trabajar para ayudar a mi papá y a mi mamá.
The conditions in the maquila areas was frightful. People living in cardboard houses. Literally, there were cardboard, the lucky ones would have a tin roof on cinder blocks. No electricity, no running water. There would be a sewer trench down the middle of the little streets. And I suppose they'd have a pump somewhere to pump their water. And I suspected it was probably contaminated water.
Cuando me junté con mi esposo en la maquiladora, pues casi al año salí embarazada de mi primer hija, que yo tenía que estar yendo frecuentemente al baño. En la maquiladora no se me daba permiso para ir al baño. Se me daba permiso solamente 2 veces.
I spoke with a gentleman that had lost an eye. I spoke with another woman that had lost several fingers. No compensation, no nothing. And what do? They fire them.
When you're purely doing everything based on profit, it doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter where your headquarters is, the desire to move overseas is almost too much for some people to handle. So I do have a difficult time with that.
And the government gave them incentives to move down there. I thought the American government was supposed to protect the American people and good paying jobs for Americans. Well, how is that right when you take and you tell a corporation, I'm going to give you a tax incentive to close your truck factory here in the United States, take jobs from American people because they don't want them anyways, and we're going to send them all to Mexico. To me, that doesn't make any sense.
I think that's the number one problem with the working people of America, is the outsourcing of jobs. And a lot of that goes back to NAFTA, CAFTA, and the China trade agreement.
Well, that was the big North American Free Trade Agreement, which was supposed to bring the Mexicans up to our standard of living. Instead of that, all the companies went offshore and used cheap slave labor to make the product and ship it back into the United States. And it caused a lot of our plants here to have to shut down because of that.
Democratic and Republican grassroots politicians and many labor union representatives also say that they are concerned that migrants and the employers who hire them are causing a rush to the bottom in terms of wages and working conditions.
It's my role as an elected official here to look out for the people that I represent and for the people of the state of Alabama. Wages have been suppressed. People have been displaced from their jobs because of illegal immigration.
Our people could use those jobs, but they're not there for them. Just like in Laurel, Mississippi, 600 plus folks stand in line for those jobs. So Americans will work. They're not fat and lazy.
Migrants, pro-migrant activists, and employers say migrants only take jobs domestic workers don't want.
Yeah, one of the things you hear is that immigrants aren't taking Americans' jobs because the Americans don't want the jobs that they're doing. That's not true. The Americans will do anything. They're taking jobs that Americans won't do at those wage rates or those benefits.
When we go and negotiate contracts, then it makes it hard for us to get a decent wage in there because they know companies know that they can get the Hispanics to come in and work for the wages, like minimum wage, and the benefits and stuff that we try and get for our employees, then that makes it hard for us to get a decent package once we go in negotiation.
And the one that's making the money off of this and taking advantage of everybody is actually the people that's hiring them. They're still charging the same prices as if they had Americans out there working. They're paying the immigrants less. If I was addressing immigrants in general, we would try to organize them. If we could organize the immigrants, then we can compete with them. It goes back to then we're making the same wages, then we're getting the same benefits. And probably illegal immigrants too.
I know why you took my joy, you don't have very much yourself. I know why you took my home, to leverage a bit more wealth. I know why you took my medicine, and give it to the insurance man. But why did you take my job, when I was doing the best that I can?
Free trade did to Mexico's small farmers on a massive scale what it did to Alabama's textile industry on a small scale. To the people of DeKalb County's town of Fort Payne, which once prided itself on being the sock capital of the world, free trade agreements with China, Canada, Caribbean countries, and Central America have been devastating. By 2005, 50 of Fort Payne's 150 sock manufacturing companies had closed or experienced employee layoffs.
We've been in business for 25 years when we'd had to close in 2005. And you'd have all these families working for you, and they became your family. It was like Thanksgiving and Christmas, you know, the mills would shut down and we'd have Thanksgiving parties and Christmas parties, and you knew who you were working with. And you got real close with those people. They've gone in other directions now to find work, and in the Chattanooga area and Scottsboro and different places, Huntsville.
In 2007, Montreal-based Gildan Activewear bought V.I. Pruitt & Son, Fort Payne's largest sock factory. Gildan, which had manufacturing facilities in Honduras, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, and Haiti, was an opponent of import safeguards.
Do you have any feel for why a Montreal-owned company would want to come to Alabama and buy up the textile industry?
I can tell you why. Because labor in the South is cheap and there's no fear of unions.
Gildan is a multinational company that exists for one reason and one reason only, and that's profit. Basically, they're utilizing cheap labor with no benefits. They don't have to invest in machinery. They don't have to invest in land, buildings, any assets on U.S. soil. They move from country to country to country wherever the labor and the cost of doing business is the cheapest.
In 2008, 26 anti-illegal migrant bills were introduced into the Alabama state legislature. Alabama State Senator Scott Beeson sponsored many of the bills.
For illegal immigration, jobs and cost are big issues. They're easier to talk about. One of the issues for me is also kind of I see a gradual loss of what I consider a unified society. I see the gradual degradation of the English language. There are people who will say assimilation is going to happen. It's always happened before, assimilation will happen again. When the great migrations from Europe, where you had Italians coming in and people from countries, Russians were coming in, people from all over Europe were coming in, the numbers were nowhere near what they are now. But you never saw the push towards a bilingual state. I mean, we're talking about the state of Alabama having signs in every grocery store, signs at every pharmacy. You call any bank, you call the cable company, you call the phone company for service, and you have to choose between English and Spanish. I think that is a poor road to go down as a government. We should be a unified country. The goal should be that we're trying to assimilate people, and legal immigration in smaller numbers is something you can assimilate. I personally would like to see a fence all the way across for the money they spend talking and wasting on so many port projects in Washington. I think they could build that fence, and I would like to see the border sealed off, and then we can really deal with the problems.
This isn't about race. This isn't about anybody's ethnic background. It is about the law.
We are not against immigration. Our job is to stop terrorists and their weapons coming across our borders. While we're doing that, we're encountering illegal immigration. But there is a way to come into the country legally. And if you're not doing that, it is our duty to stop you and make you do things right.
For most Latin Americans, and for all poor people and all indigenous people who live on communally held lands, there is no line to get into in order to enter the United States legally. America has two basic systems by which a person may cross its borders legally. One system is for Canadians, Western Europeans, and some Eastern Europeans. They may enter with only a passport. Another system is for Latin Americans, Africans, and most Asians. They must have a visa to enter the U.S. legally.
Canada and Latin America are treated quite differently for immigration purposes.
Canadians aren't even considered aliens. They're considered foreign nationals, so they can freely come back and forth from Canada to the United States.
Porque así como nosotros, como guatemaltecos, a veces, que ustedes saben que en muchos países son diferentes, que hay países que son bien pobres, países que tienen hay muchas personas de bajos recursos, y en la cual que nosotros somos uno de las cuales que nosotros a veces no calificamos, porque no somos empresarios, no podemos viajar para acá.
People who don't own property and are very, very poor or live on communally held property, it is highly unlikely that they could show the strong enough ties to their home country in order to come. The number one reason that people are denied from coming to the United States is because of money.
Porque nos hacen un estudio socioeconómico y ven si uno no reúne los requisitos que tengamos uno dinero para venir para acá. En ese tiempo no tenía yo trabajo.
In the real estate?
Tampoco.
The question I get asked most is, why don't they come legally? They don't come legally because they can't.
There is an exception to America's legal barrier to poor people. It is the H-2A or H-2B guest worker visa. American employers, not foreign workers, request them. In Mobile, Alabama, seafood processors and shipbuilders testified before the Alabama legislature's joint interim Patriotic Immigration Commission that they couldn't find domestic workers or could not afford to continuously employ workers idled during end-of-season lulls. They appealed for more guest worker visas.
Who owns Master Marine?
Master Marine is owned by a company in McLean, Virginia.
Is McLean the parent company?
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
another company on McLean. Nothing owns McLean.
Can we go off camera for a minute?
Bayou La Batterie is one of several areas in the United States where Sun Myung Moon and the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, otherwise known as the Unification Church, have significant holdings. Master Marine is owned by the Unification Church. The Unification Church's finances are mysterious, but the London newspaper The Guardian estimates that Sun Myung Moon's personal worth is $990 million. The issue being raised was Mr. Dungan's representation of Master Marine's financial situation before the Joint Interim Patriotic Immigration Commission. Is Master Marine a financially limited mom-and-pop Alabama shipbuilder with a bona fide need for low-wage imported workers? Is Master Marine part of a global organization with substantial assets which can afford to employ domestic workers even if they must be idle during certain seasons of the year? Mr. Dungan declined to address the question.
We've hired American workers, family and non-family, and had trouble with them working, not showing up. You know, these guys are working in the elements every day, in the heat, in the rain, and it's hard work. And every American that we've hired has either left before break at 9:30 or not come back.
We heard this from agriculture, we heard this from poultry, we heard this from large plants on the Gulf Coast. Oyster Group, they were very, very actively lobbying us to make sure the economic workforce side of this was met. Forestry was very, very adamant about a workforce need.
Last year we looked at the prevailing wages for tree planters in Alabama, and they tended to be, we looked at Selma, for example, that was $13 an hour. That's what the government sets as the prevailing wage rate that has to be paid to tree planters. We looked at that and we said, surely there is someone in Selma, Alabama who would be interested in working for $13 an hour plus overtime. That's a pretty decent wage.
Wilcox County, Perry County, Greene County, Lowndes County, all of those counties in the Black Belt, Selma, have unemployment rates 12, 14, 15%. It would be better to import those people. We've had a lot of supposition, a lot of hyperbole in taking advantage of that particular population, but we've seen very little activity in order to make it happen.
But the truth of it is that no one's looking in, rural Alabama for these workers. They don't want workers from rural Alabama. They want the guest workers.
There's a holler down in yonder hills in the land of the free, and the hands that pick the food which fills the belly of the queen. She's sitting ripe, plump as a goose between a hill and a rock and a stream, and praying to the hangman's noose to lies and to cups of tea. And by Jove, somebody put a coward in the governor's clothes. Nothing new. It's just another tyrant in the sheriff's shoes.
What we're saying is, if the government is going to set up this transnational system of recruitment, then it should hold responsible the people who are benefiting from this system, and that's employers.
A veces vender algún animalito, una vaca, un becerro, para sacar el dinero para poder viajar a Estados Unidos o conseguir prestado para poder salir del país. Me gasté como 7,400 de gastos de camino, comidas, transporte y la visa, como 7,400 mexicanos. Nos endrogamos para llegar allá a Monterrey. Ahí nos metieron en un hotel como de 0 estrellas. Como estábamos con otras 60 gentes en un solo cuarto, un solo baño para todos, sin agua al baño, por cierto. Nos iban a cobrar por llevarnos para allá como $1,000
$1,500.
Anteriormente no, hasta mitad de temporada regresaban $160 a mitad de temporada. Y pues era muy poco para lo que se gastaba.
El problema con el sistema H2A es que los trabajadores van con una expectativa de mejorar sus condiciones, pero como van bajo un contrato, se ven forzados a trabajar con un solo patrón, aunque ese patrón no cumpla su lado del contrato, al no pagarles, por ejemplo, el salario mínimo, otros beneficios que les corresponden, o obligándolos a trabajar excesivamente, y a estos trabajadores se les obliga diciéndoles que si no hacen este trabajo, les pueden cancelar la visa.
Bueno, la razón es de que pues aquí trabajamos a labor y pues no es suficiente para sostener la familia. Por eso pues decidimos ir a los Estados Unidos.
Mi papá se iba por necesidad, no por gusto. Y pues aquí no hay muchas oportunidades de trabajo, por eso mismo lo hacía. Y pues sí es feo que un padre se vaya y deje a su familia.
No nos pagaban por horas, nos pagaban nada más por el puro contrato.
Y a veces nos faltaban cajas de verdura. Teníamos una cuenta y salían menos en la cuenta del checador. Pues a la semana son unos $70-80. Ya al final de temporada pues era bastante. Creo que eran como 25,000 pesos mexicanos.
Sí, porque pues, nos habían hecho un papel pues, de que nos iban a pagar nosotros por hora. Y ya resultando que ya empezamos a trabajar allá y todo, y pues no, la verdad no. Sí, pues era, cada viernes nos daban el papel en la huerta, pues ya hasta nos lo daban de lo que íbamos la cantidad que íbamos a regresar. No, pues ya hasta se sentía re feo regresarlo, porque pensaba uno que era todo para él, para uno pues, el dinero, pero no, a veces nos tocaba regresar más de la mitad, el dinero.
Bueno, pues se supone que la empresa para la que trabaja este señor, supone que él está pagando conforme a la ley, legalmente, el salario mínimo se supone que es. Entonces, yo me imagino que el señor que nos tenía contratado para no tener problemas como legales o no sé, pues él aparentaba que nos pagaba el salario mínimo y como nos lo depositaban al banco, él mismo nos llevaba en el autobús a cobrar el dinero al banco, y al salir del banco, pues ya supuestamente nos habían pagado legalmente, pero él nomás estiraba la mano al subir al autobús y decía, tú nada más hiciste tanto en la semana, te toca tanto, y la diferencia de lo que te cobraste en el banco, eso es para mí, no tienes que regresar. Y nos quitaba esa parte. Más del 50% de lo que ganábamos nosotros.
No, pues él nos amenazaba y nos decía que si no regresábamos el dinero, o sea, lo que tenían anotado en su libreta, pues que nos iba a mandar pues para México.
Pues desde que metimos la demanda, ya no aparecemos en la lista para ir para allá a trabajar con ellos.
Were there workers in the fields with you who were not contract workers?
En ese tiempo éramos puros contratados. Después, al final de temporada, ya había muchos ilegales. En los últimos años ya hubo ilegales, pero anteriormente éramos puros contratados.
I'm very interested in the fact that the undocumented workers would come in at the end and they would be given the best fields. There's a benefit there to the employer, and I'm trying to understand what that benefit is.
El beneficio de ellos era que a ellos les pagaba más barato. Si era por horas, les pagaba $6.50 la hora. Y por contrato yo creo que igual que a nosotros, a 55 centavos la caja. Pero pienso que había había más preferencia para ellos.
What you see is workers who incur enormous amounts of debt to get to the United States and are paying off those debts at very high interest rates to fairly scary loan shark types who are in their home countries where their spouses and children live, get to the United States who have the option of working only for one employer. And so if that employer turns out not to have a lot of work or not to pay what's promised or not to pay legal wages, the worker has very little recourse. The worker can't work anywhere else, and as a practical matter, he cannot go home because of the debt. And that is a recipe for abuse. There's just no doubt about it. That is a bad system.
Entonces estamos advirtiendo a toda la gente que cuando echan spray porque se muere el retoño del tabaco, ellos no pueden sprayar a 1 kilómetro por el mal olor del spray. Hubo files que andaba uno cortando el retoño y no se lava uno las manos bien, no te queda un aroma que en vez de comer llegas a vomitar. Hubo una vez, el patrón sprayó cerca de andábamos como 20 personas cortando el retoño. Yo les dije a ellos y muchos les dije, ya bueno, porque yo tengo mucho tiempo trabajando tabaco, ya llega muy cerca. Andaba cerca de él, ya casi no le echaba. Y cerquita con un mexicano, también de los mojados. Se paró cerquita y dijo, no pasa nada, no sean miedosos, no, pues huele bien feo, se siente uno mareado. Y ya otro día se pusieron mal los 3 muchachos, no pudieron trabajar más. ¿Qué pasó? No puedo, dijo. No puedo. Y dijo, y otro día, dijo, ya nos corrieron, que déjenme las camas porque van a venir otros. Entonces el siguiente día cortamos de vuelta, pero ya muchos nos sentíamos, yo me sentí mal. Fuimos al corte de vuelta a cortar tabaco y cortar retoño. Ese día me tocó a mí, a 2 nos tocó. Cortaba el retoño, pero yo sentía que no era yo. Yo me palanqueaba porque me daba el aire y me dijo uno, yo me llamo Gaetano, dice un señor, no calles, sálgase. Dije yo quiero trabajar, yo tengo mi niño. Pues entré de vuelta al surco y cortar el retoño nomás no es difícil, es fácil, pero lo malo es que uno se siente bien mal. Agarraba la mata y me quedaba y me hincaba. Cortaba el retoño y me dijo, salte, está bien malo. Me salió un palo grande, me acosté, a ver si me fueron a echar agua. Me echaron agua y me sentí, a ver cómo me sentí bien. Me escondieron para que me reforzara a 2. Me reforcé, me levanté a trabajar de vuelta y me cortaron el tiempo. Me dijo que me iban a cortar el tiempo. Un mayordomo cuando me iba a cortar el tiempo. Pues sí quedó. Al siguiente día, de los 17 cayeron todos, nomás quedamos 5. Todos en una vuelta del surco. Caían, se quedaban. Me vayan todos unos en los pinos, escarbaban la tierra para meterse con lo caliente de la tierra. De esos 5 nos dijo el mayordomo, no sirve, no valen para nada, lárguense para México. A nosotros nos llega más gente. Cortaba, me quedaba hincado. De que yo sentía que la tierra estaba temblando, yo sentía que me caía. Me dijo, párate, no puedo. Y para que ellos no me miraran, para que ellos no me corrieran, me hincaba.
Se va con tantas ilusiones de hacer algo aquí y pues no son unas cosas fáciles. Regresa uno, yo creo que peor, porque pues ya todo lo que vive uno desde que sale, dejar a la familia, todo. Y para nada.
Los niños siempre tienen ilusiones de que uno viene del norte. De papi, ¿qué me traes? No me traes nada. No, a veces no me podía ver niño, a veces me podía la droga que yo debía, de todo lo que, de ver a ellos, de que yo tengo mi familia en la escuela, de todo.
That's why we have said again and again that people who are calling for guest worker programs to be the model for immigration reform need to look at the programs we have. They need to look at what these programs look like in practice. Because what they look like in practice is perilously close to indentured servitude and human trafficking. I mean, that is the system that we have. We can move from having 125,000 people to having a few million people in that condition, but I don't think the condition would change.
It varies from country to country, the amount of the population that's indigenous. But for instance, Guatemala is heavily indigenous. Mexico, especially southern Mexico, is heavily indigenous. The unfortunate reality is the more indigenous you are, the less wealth you have, the less political power you have.
Usually they would be denied before they were ever even processed, beyond the consular level.
In the last maybe 15 years, probably coinciding more than anything with the passing of NAFTA, we have begun to receive rather large numbers of indigenous people from the southern parts of Mexico and from Central America. They come with very little money, which means that when they cross, they are paying the very cheapest guides, which means that there are more days walking in the desert. So they have very little sense of the geography. They'll land in Douglas, Arizona, for example, after crossing through Agua Prieta, and knock at the priest's door and say, can you tell me how to get to Florida? Thinking that it's a couple of days walk or not far.
Sufrimos mucho pues por ahí ahí pues el desierto, ahí la migra pues está agarrando a gente y ahí tortillas de costada, lo que trae pues lo quitó ahí, lo agarró ahí la migra pues y no tienen de comer pues. Gracias a Dios que llegué bien ahí en mi pueblo y no trae nada.
Whip-and-wheeled youngin', I've gotta tell you something. Well, blessed are the meeks, get your guns off the street. And blessed are the poor, so don't hurt them anymore. With your manufactured dreams of men in suits and ties. And when it's said and done, you spit a stream of lies. Geronimo's daughter need not apply.
Indigenous peoples are being pushed off ancestral, communally held lands in Mexico, Central America, and South America. They are being pushed through other indigenous peoples' lands. Estimates are that of the 2,000 migrants who try to cross the border every day, 1,500 pass through the lands of the To'ono O'odham Nation. Most of the nation is in Pima County, Arizona. The To'ono O'odham Nation. Ground zero for migrant deaths. Ground zero for indigenous migrant deaths. The nation is undergoing an intertribal dispute over migrants. On one side are tribal leaders who say 1,500 migrants a day are causing severe environmental and religious damage to sacred land. They forbid placing water for migrants on the reservation. On the other side are members like Mike Wilson, who disobey the injunction.
When I encounter migrants, you see the face of the dispossessed. You see the face of the marginalized. You see the face of the unloved, of the unclean. You see the face of poverty. And you multiply that 2,000 times over.
My battle is not against Tohono people. My battle is against the government of the Tohono nation, which has the resources, has the manpower, and has casino profits to create its own water distribution program, the width and length of the Tohono nation. When I was the lay pastor in Sells, my session was asking me very critically, Pastor, shouldn't you be teaching and modeling us how to obey all federal, state, and local civil laws? And why are you aiding and abetting criminal activity and criminals? Because by legal definition, they are all illegal. And my response to them was, as your pastor, if I must decide between a legalistic code and a universal moral code, which one must I obey? God's children are dying. Your brothers and sisters in Christ are dying. Men, women, children, infants, and pregnant women are dying in the desert. Which law must I follow? They don't want to acknowledge a moral question. They don't want to acknowledge a biblical mandate. That I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me water. Because if they acknowledge the moral question, they must acknowledge a moral responsibility. And they don't want to do that. It's easier to let them die.
Mr. Politician, you got to make a big decision and about the state of things. Well, one thing that we don't want here in the sand is just another Birmingham. There's another burning Birmingham.
Del cruzar a las vías del tren casi nos llevó un día. ¿Por qué? Porque es un pueblo y que entre el día te tienes que ocultar. En la noche tratar de que sea el tren. Y está la migración y hay perros.
Arizona, some people say, is the new Alabama, the epicenter of an intense struggle in which every day 2,000 people illegally try to cross a rigid demarcation line where thousands of other people try to stop them.
I remember that we were going through this long grass that poked and it was all over me and it was poking me. I was scared because I used to be afraid of the dark.
Alabamians continue to invoke the memory of the 4 little girls who died in the bombing of Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church in 1963. In Arizona, the new Alabama, at least 4 little girls have died because of inherently violent economic policies and a brutal militarized border.
Olivia Luna Noguera was an 11-year-old girl whose body was found on the territory, on the land of the Tohono O'odham Nation in southern Arizona in July 2006. When authorities found her, her body temperature was 106 degrees. She was wearing pink sneakers. She was traveling with her 16-year-old sister. They were trying to reach a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, to join their parents who had been living there for a number of years. And what makes this death, for me at least, especially tragic is her youth, and also the way that many people responded to it. A number of people blamed the parents, asking what type of parents would force their child, right, force their children to cross such harsh terrain. Right? But I think that's the wrong question. I think the question we need to ask is what type of society forces parents to make that choice?
En el 92, cuando salí, me acuerdo que cruzábamos, mi esposo y yo, a pie por el hoyo, sin ningún problema para cruzar. Cruzamos como si nada, cruzamos parados, no tuvimos ni siquiera que agacharnos para poder cruzar la línea. Era
All migrants risk their lives and their families' property to cross borders illegally. With the increasing militarization of the border beginning in 1993, crossing has steadily become more dangerous, more expensive, and more humiliating.
How much did you pay your career debt?
$2,000.
Los del Salvador sí pagamos $6,000, $5,000.
$6,500 para venir a llegar hasta aquí en este país, y el dinero me costó bastante porque me estafaron. Y si no se lo dábamos, nos iba él a regresarnos. ¿Y cómo se íbamos a regresar si ya estábamos metidos en deudas? Que nuestra familia luchó. Mi suegra tuvo que dar los papeles de su casa para poder yo estar aquí. Y vendí mi moto que tenía y vendí un terreno para poder llegar hasta aquí.
Cuando llegamos a México, después de cruzar dos fronteras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Guatemala, México, llegamos a un lago. Ahí tuvimos que abordar dos lanchas. Fue un momento difícil porque nos dividieron en grupos diferentes. Un grupo pasó, el otro no pasó debido a que la lancha volteó. Compañeros murieron. Luego tienes que abordar un tráiler donde nos meten a 130 personas por 28 horas, desde Tabasco hasta Puebla.
Desde Guatemala vienen pagando dinero, vienen pagando cuotas para la Mara Salvatrucha, para los guardias del tren. Si no pagan la cuota, los tiran del tren o los pueden asesinar. Venía una mujer de Centroamérica con su bebé en brazos en la parte de arriba del tren. La venció el cansancio, pero iba a la orilla del tren. Se quedó dormida y su bebé se le cayó del tren. Y cuando pudo bajarse, el bebé ya no lo encontró.
Cuando nos subimos al tren y nos escondimos en el baño, 5 personas amontonados, con un calor sofocante, con el ruido, eso es siempre, el ruido del motor siempre, porque estás dentro de la máquina. El pito, las paradas, ese pito que conocemos todos, lo escuchas fuerte. Y ahí viajamos, hicimos acerca como casi entre 10 horas, desde el río Texas a San Antonio.
Había veces que no había comida para darle a mi hija más grande porque no había trabajo. Y muchas veces comía una sola vez al día. Entonces ella tenía un dolor muy fuerte en su estómago, casi siempre. Y yo la llevaba con doctores y no la aliviaban porque no era necesidad de medicina, sino de buena alimentación. Entonces, al yo salir embarazada, mi segunda niña tenía casi 7 meses, cuando me dijeron que que quizás mi bebé iba a nacer de su cabeza muy grande y de su cuerpo muy pequeño. Y me dijo, no, hay muchas probabilidades de que tu bebé
viva. Mi esposo y yo platicamos esa noche y decidimos irnos, cruzar a Estados Unidos.
Venía una señorita como de aproximadamente 18 años y los ladrones lo que hicieron, empezaron a violarla delante de nuestros ojos. Y la señorita nos empezó a gritar que la ayudáramos, que la ayudáramos. Y nosotros nos íbamos a levantar a ayudarla, pero arriesgaba nuestra vida que nos mataran.
Decidimos aventarnos a la aventura. Nos vinimos a la orilla de la línea. Había unos carros aplastados. Había 3 carros que nos sirvieron como escalera para poder cruzar a Estados Unidos. En el brinco sí habían aparecido 2 chamaquitos que andaban ahí viendo a ver qué podían arrebatarle a las personas que brincaban el muro. Sí le quitaron a mi marido la mitad de lo que él llevaba. Él agarró a la niña en el brazo, la niña más grande, y con un brazo se resbaló hacia abajo. Estaba casi 4 metros o 5 metros de altura. Pues solamente me encomendé a Dios y brinqué también. Me acuerdo que acomodé mi estómago por un lado y hice esto. Agarré el tubo y me abracé de él. Como tardé tanto por estar embarazada, no pude hacer las cosas rápido, me agarraron.
Y que veníamos 20 y no cabían en ese carro, tuvieron que montar uno sobre otro, en una expedition, como 1 hora y media. Los niños que venían llorando porque no aguantaban.
Después nos llevaron al desierto, en medio del desierto, y nos dejaron ahí. Y después vino un carro y nos llevó así. Yo estaba enfrente en el carro, el del lado del copiloto y abajo. Y fueron como 10 horas de ahí para Phoenix. Y tenía yo mucho miedo porque tenía miedo que si chocábamos ella se iba a romper el cuello porque estaba muy apretada con mi hermano.
Cuando veíamos el río Bravo que le llaman, como si que también las fuerzas y el ánimo se nos acabó porque el río era muy grande. Cuando pasamos nadando el río Grande, al otro lado, los coyotes que nos traían cruzando el río, se llevaron nuestra ropa a un lugar seguro y nos hicieron caminar en puras espinas, caminando descalzos, sin zapatos, sin nada. Y dolían mucho las espinas, desnudos. Corrimos bastante porque cerquita de nosotros estaba migración.
The helicopters come really low and shine their lights, and they call it dusting, and stir up all the dirt around the person to get them all scared and running, and especially if they're in a large group, people get lost from their group. That's the most dangerous thing, when they get lost from their group.
Algo que desconocen los migrantes al llegar al altar son las condiciones. Muchos de ellos no saben lo que es un desierto. Difícilmente lo sabemos nosotros que vivimos en él, ellos no lo saben. Por ejemplo, las temperaturas en invierno fácilmente caen por debajo de los 0 grados. Y en verano sobrepasan los 125 Fahrenheit a la sombra. Expuestos al sol se incrementa de 5 a 10 centígrados más. Las plantas en el desierto de Arizona en algunos lugares no crecen más de 1 metro, lo cual es casi imposible cubrirse del sol. Cuando corren se pierden muy fácilmente. Al perderse no saben a dónde caminar. Y el único punto que tienen para orientarse es el sol. Muchos de ellos siguen al sol cuando se está ocultando. Si seguimos al sol cuando se está ocultando, nos estamos introduciendo más en el desierto, donde es casi imposible sobrevivir.
Dice ser coyote, dice saber las rutas, pero no se les sabe. Y están tonteando en el desierto, no saben realmente a dónde van. Por eso mucha gente se pierde y pues se desaparece en el desierto.
violan a las señoritas y cuando vienen al camino que le vienen exigiendo, si no me vas a dar tal cosa yo te voy a matar, si no me vas a dar tal cosa te voy a dejar botada en el camino, si no me vas a dar eso te voy a dejar tirada, y por eso es que las señoritas por temor le dan lo que él les pide.
I was a little bit scared because in the desert there's lizards and snakes.
Al llevar como una hora aproximadamente, 1 hora y media de caminar, nos asaltaron. Yo iba siguiendo al coyote porque pues, yo no lo quería perder. Luego de... Es que con eso sí me pongo así como que... You know. Ok, luego de eso... pues el coyote llevaba a mi niño y lo bajó y lo llamaron nada más a él. Yo me fui ahí, caminando atrás de él pues porque no lo quería perder y me dijeron de que me regresara y nos pusieron a todos en una fila recta y una persona empezó a revisar las maletas de todos y otra persona nos estaba apuntando con una pistola y la otra persona estaba revisando a todos uno por uno. Luego de eso, pues en ese momento sí sentí mucho miedo porque pensé que nos iban a hacer algo y yo dije pues, que a la hora de que me fueran a llamar a mí, pues mis niños se podían poner a llorar y los podían golpear por lo mismo o les podían hacer algo peor. Me dijo que para qué la había traído, que ya no me había dicho que la trajera, que mejor la hubiera dejado con su abuelito.
Al migrante se le ha dicho que tenga mucho cuidado cuando vaya a cruzar el desierto, los peligros que pueda suceder. En el desierto la persona puede fallecer por falta de agua, por falta de comida.
Lo peligroso es que se viene uno del camino y si traes comida pues está bien pasar y todos son montañas, cerro y si ahí se acaba la fuerza o lo que traes pues lo deja uno atrás y se muere uno y pues se queda uno atrás y ya no puede seguir adelante.
Fue una experiencia grata, bonita en el sentido de que cuando crucé la frontera la temperatura estaba completamente fría. Era la medianoche. Parece raro que les diga que es bonito, ¿verdad? Pero todo eso me ayudó para cuando llegara aquí, porque cada día recordaba esa noche, cuando muchas personas no lograron cruzar.
Cruzar el desierto. Al cruzar el desierto, los mexicanos, antes de hacerlo, llenan una mochila con cosas, con ropa, con comida, con agua, con lo necesario para poder sobrevivir. Pero adentro de esa mochila también llevan todos sus sueños y todas sus esperanzas.
yo lo necesitaba por sacar adelante mi familia y por ser mi casa, tener mis propias cosas. Y por tener mis propias cosas, por tener algo en la casa, tener mi propio techo y tener lo que... Tengo una familia con un hijo con 7 meses y quería sacarlo adelante.
You find all kinds of things out here. You find Bibles, you find little doilies and things they brought from home, letters. I found a bottle of cologne one time, and it was called Courage. You find little kid backpacks and little mirrors and little, tubes of lipstick or things that they left behind. We find birth certificates and driver's licenses, and things that look important, photographs, pictures of people with no names on the back, so we can't even return them to whoever they belong to.
Cuando ellos no pueden cruzar, cuando ellos abandonan la mochila en el desierto, muchos de ellos también abandonan sus sueños y sus esperanzas junto con todo.
So the fact that people are trying to come to the United States to access certain rights, right? And the fact that the border has to be increasingly militarized in order to deny them from realizing those rights is an example of how this, what we might call a violence of foundation, an original act of violence, translates into a violence of conservation.
The militarization of the U.S.-Mexico border began in conjunction with NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. According to the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service's 1994 Southwest Border Strategy, increased border militarization would be a deterrent to illegal migration. The strategy included making crossings so difficult and costly that fewer individuals would try. In other words, migrants would be pushed away from the relative safety of crossing through urban areas and into more and more remote areas. Limited numbers would die, word would get back to Mexican communities, and migrants would stop trying to cross. In part, the INS border strategy was based on its 1993 conclusion that throughout the following decade, illegal migration would increase as a result of the implementation of NAFTA.
So the very fact that we have people from Mexico and beyond now trying to come to what's today the southwest of the United States against the dictates of the U.S. federal government has translated into this militarization apparatus that we've seen explode over the last 15 years. We now have 18,000 Border Patrol agents. It's scheduled to grow to 20,000 over the next year. Right? In effect, you have what a lot of people in the Southwest describe as an occupying army, right? That is there to maintain the conquest, right? And what goes along with it, this denial of rights to anyone who would challenge that conquest by, for example, trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico boundary without authorization to find work or to reunite him or herself with their families.
More migrants die crossing Arizona than anywhere else along the U.S. border. But prior to 1997, no one kept records of migrant deaths. Since 1997, about 5,000 migrant bodies have been recovered from the American Southwest. If this figure is accurate, it means that more people have died crossing the U.S.-Mexico border than died as a result of the September 11th terrorist attacks and Hurricane Katrina combined.
Well, the typical story that we get from those who are traveling with an individual who has died crossing the desert is not a very happy tale. Generally, it's an individual who progressively becomes more disoriented, confused, ill, meaning with nausea and vomiting, and eventually will just simply collapse. The death is not one where someone is just okay one minute and deceased the next. It seems to be a great deal of suffering involved.
the new border enforcement strategy that began in '94, their theory was that once the word got out about how hazardous that crossing would be, and particularly the increasing numbers of deaths of migrants, would be a deterrent to other people trying to cross. They were successful in sealing off the urban areas of the border, the traditional areas of migration. And they were right, people began to die. And they began to maintain statistics in '97. The number of deaths became significant enough for the United States government to begin to keep those statistics. The official numbers are somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 people. That's not an accurate statistic because people are dying in very remote, isolated areas of the desert.
Caminando como tres noches caminando y ahí pues lo vi un cuerpo, pues estaba muerto, pues cabeza, el brazo, costilla del muerto se murió ahí desierto. Y yo también pues le tengo miedo pues cuando me vi de eso.
That migrants that we talk to keep telling us of coming across bodies and coming across bones and coming across skeletons.
This is the second cooler that we built to accommodate the overflow of border crosser deaths that we have. Generally, these people can be here for months and sometimes even years as we attempt to identify them. And this cooler provides that long-term storage.
Estoy muy cansado y tengo mucha sed. Estoy adolorido con ampollas en mis pies. Ayúdame, Señor, que mi muerte se espere hasta después. Y yo siento que otra frontera estoy cruzando. Y en el otro lado la muerte me está esperando.
Una allá uno de allá no es mi pueblo, pero de Oaxaca pues se murió por decir que llegó bien allá de donde fue pues y me dijo el coyote, yo no sé a dónde se fue y no lo vi y que no sabe, pero ahí está testigo pues dice que se murió la muchacha, pero no hasta ahorita. Tiene como 28 años, tiene con un niño nada más.
No puedo continuar, no puedo caminar, no quiero morir, no quiero morir, no quiero morir, no quiero morir, no quiero morir.
This death toll and all of the suffering, that is a gross violation of human rights in everybody's estimate except the United States government's.
En la última década se han contabilizado más de 5,000 personas muertas y se está convirtiendo en el cementerio más grande de todo el mundo.
A couple of years ago, a migrant died almost in the back door of the Baptist church, in cells, and nobody said a word. You would think it was a stray dog that died.
All right, folks, we're going to let the credits play, and then we'll be back here bringing our guests in just a couple minutes. All right, everybody. Russ, you're muted there. Just got to unmute your microphone. Beautiful. All righty. Well, we hope you enjoyed that. Very, very powerful film. I enjoy it every time I watch it, and I watched it a few days ago in anticipation of doing this again because I figured, well, you'll have to put the kids to bed while it's on, and I can't look away from it. Every time I start watching it, I'm just compelled to keep watching. So
it's intense.
It is an intense movie. It just grabs you and doesn't let you go. Like it just like you can't. There's not a dull moment. There's not a moment where the emotion of it lets up, you know. And so, fantastically well done. Thank you all very much for being here and for watching this film with us tonight. We are now going to bring in a couple of guests. The first is the filmmaker herself. Her name is Ellin Jimmerson. You all know Ellin. Ellin directed this film. She edited this film. Here she is. Hey, Ellin.
Hey. What? You sneak into my room?
I did.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Got my set back there.
Yeah. Trying to prove I've read a book or two.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely.
We're about to change our backgrounds.
Yeah.
That's our New Year's resolution.
Well, we're going to tweak them. I mean, I'm going to keep
We're gonna
the shelf
tweak 'em,
and stuff. We'll tweak them, exactly.
Put some pictures of your kids up and Amanda and
Well, I don't want to put
whoever,
the pictures
Russell.
of the kids up because
no,
of
don't do
the
that.
haters
That's
and
a
the
bad
losers.
idea. Yeah. That was a bad
idea. We're looking into if we can get enough donations. You know those giant aquariums.
Oh yeah.
I'm
That'd
kidding.
be awesome.
We're not. We're not gonna do that.
Yeah, have fish flying around. Yeah. All right. Well, we have another guest who's waiting. I want to introduce Todd Miller. Todd Miller is an independent journalist based in Tucson, Arizona. His books include Empire of Borders, the expansion of the U.S. border around the world, Border Patrol Nation, dispatches from the front lines of Homeland Security, Storming the Wall, Climate Change, Migration, and Homeland Security, and Build Bridges, Not Walls. in 2021. He also writes a blog, The Border Chronicle, on Substack with Melissa Del Bosque. His name is Todd Miller once again. Todd, thank you very much for joining. You just got to unmute your microphone there, and you'll be good to go. Todd, great to see you. Great to meet you.
Yeah,
Hey,
thank
Todd.
you for having me. Thanks.
Hey, Todd.
Appreciate it. Hey, Ellen, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Good to see you.
Yeah.
So I'm
nice to
assuming
see
you had
too.
seen this film before. I know you were watching as we went there.
Yeah, I have. Yes. This
All
is the
right.
second time I've seen it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you both here. So I'm just going to intro this because we're going to clip the interview portion of this separately. So we're here with Ellin Jimmerson and Todd Miller discussing Ellen's film called The Second Cooler. I'll play a trailer for that when we clip the piece, but we don't have to play it now since we just watched it. So this film came out in 2013, 2 years before Trump declared his candidacy for president and put this immigration issue really front and center in a way that it hadn't quite been before. It had always been a contentious issue, but it had not been as incendiary as he made it. And so how has the immigration debate in your minds, as people have been following this for a long time, changed since this film's release back in 2013? And how has it remained the same? Ellen, you can go first if you want.
Okay.
You
Well,
made the movie. Fair is fair.
Todd has a lot to.
I know. Well, I got questions for Todd too.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Good.
Believe me.
And if you don't, I can come up.
No,
with
no,
it.
I prepped stuff for Todd as well.
It's changed. In one of the things I want to point out is that the issue became bigger with Trump because the media chose to make it bigger. I mean, I've been talking about these things, as has Todd, since 2008, about militarization, about migrant deaths, about all of those things. If I knew it in 2008 when I filmed part of it, the New York Times knew it, NPR knew it, Democracy Now! Knew it, but they chose not to report on it. But when Trump was elected, then there was just this explosion of interest, and what a bad guy he is, which he is. But Obama still remains the deporter in chief. I believe I'm correct in saying that.
Well, you look at these, I mean, the two parts of the movie that jump out the most, really, I could say it's really part of the same piece. It's the worker exploitation piece of it, especially since that's the part that sort of is the most hot button in a way, aside from like the fear mongering about crime and stuff. It's a wage issue. It's a labor issue. And to see, the scene where they're being shaken down by the foreman for their wages, and then the scene where the guy has the pesticide sprayed in his face and he asked the boss not to, and the boss does it anyway and then fires him the next day because they're going to be a problem. I mean, it's just gutting, and it shows the propaganda, and like I said, I don't dismiss, neither does Russ. I don't dismiss the idea that mass migration can affect wages, but to look at that and not see the culprit for who they are, that it's the bosses, it's the ownership class, it's the political class. It's just incredible how people are propagandized into hating these people. It really is incredible. And when you see a movie, when you see scenes like that, it really hits you hard, especially in this climate. Go ahead.
Well, I lost my thought.
Right. That's okay. Todd, do you have a comment on that about the labor exploitation piece of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and that's also the part of it. Another part of it that is shown in this film that we rarely see anything or hear anything about. One of the, and I would go even further and talk about the NAFTA. Looking at the North American Free Trade Agreement, the sort of economic models that are imposed around the world, and look at that through the lens of labor exploitation. And I think the film, The Second Cooler, really like nails that by framing. I mean, the film actually literally frames it in this idea that of I mean, what you're talking about, the examples that you're giving are those egregious like examples of worker abuse, and which are there's so many of those examples of those, and so many they're all over the place. And then there's this overall overarching model of economic exploitation that you see in how economic models and impositions, and how like, you know, when you look at NAFTA, it was written by 500 Fortune 500 corporations, like some of the richest businesses in the world, in order to you know, extract from, in this case, Mexico, primarily, and create. I mean, I think like in the first couple of years after NAFTA, I believe there was 2 million small farmers that were displaced and had to come north. And when I think of labor exploitation, I think of it in those grand schemes, and how they set the conditions for what then those very abusive moments are.
Well, that's a piece of it that I hadn't thought of until I saw this film a couple of years ago, because, you know, NAFTA is often described as having shipped jobs one way, south of the border.
Right.
We never hear about the displacement south of the border that NAFTA caused, that it decimated the Mexican middle class as well and drove a lot of them north. We never hear that part of it.
We only think of them as having gotten the jobs.
Right. Yeah. We only think of them as having gotten all of our good jobs. We shipped all of our good jobs down there. We never hear that other piece of it, that actually it decimated the middle class there as well and drove a lot of them north. It's really,
yes, and I mean, there were like, you know, 1 to 2 million peasants displaced right off the bat. But some of the people I interviewed that were in the movie, one of them was an architect. So I mean, it was just a calamity. You know, people they couldn't survive. And as Scott Whiteford says, they knew at the time they signed it. The Mexican government, but also, you know, Canada and the U.S. But the thought I had is that this is, I mean, the bad guys are the employers and the politicians and the bigger corporations, but it's also, I think, the entire neoliberal capitalist ethic, and the sort of religious belief that it's somehow a good thing, you know, if we just let it go.
Well, you really.
Well, Ellen, do you think they really don't put these kinds of things on the news? You mentioned even Democracy Now!, which has a kind of mixed record in a lot of respects, because the American way of life, as degraded as it is, still would be worse without horrific exploitation, and they don't want to deal with that question.
What I can tell you is that I know at least 2 or 3 people who are very involved with immigration issues. One of whom is Joel Smith, who's with Humane Borders, puts water out on in the desert. A couple of, Todd, were you the other one who contacted? One contacted Democracy Now!, one contacted NPR. You know, they have suggestions as to stories they might cover, and said, you really need to cover what's going on out here with this policy of prevention through deterrence, funneling migrants to their deaths with the idea being that they will die. You need to cover this. And so I don't think their interest is in what's going to happen to American culture and that kind of thing. I think they're owned by people who are bigger than they are.
Getting
Yeah, and
angry about the coverage.
Pardon me?
Getting angry at them for covering it, you mean?
Well, I mean, the owners of those shows, and Todd probably knows a lot more about this than I do, but there was several years ago when public TV had put together and wanted to run a special about the Koch brothers,
Right.
and the Koch brothers said, "Don't do it," and so they didn't do it. I mean, y'all have talked about this so much about how media is not operating in our interest, and journalists are not really acting fully as journalists, even people like Amy Goodman and those people.
Well,
Todd?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
I just want to, I mean, to be fair, I actually have been on Democracy Now! A couple times.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yeah. And they interviewed Joseph Nevins, who was interviewed in The Second Cooler as well, after he wrote his book Dying to Live, which is really about people dying when they cross the border. So Democracy Now! Has done some coverage of migrant deaths. But all the ones that you mentioned, that I think they're like the only ones. And I always I go back to like the 2016 Trump campaign, when he was basically claiming that there was nothing on the border. That he was going to build this big, huge wall, be out of nothing. And then the media outlets across the board really just repeating what he was saying without doing their homework and looking and saying, oh, there has been tremendous amount of money put into this border and this enforcement apparatus. There is actually already a wall, like 700 miles of wall and barriers. Yeah. There's a whole surveillance apparatus that's present on the border. There's 21,000 armed border patrol agents on the border, and yet saying I'm going to build this wall because there's nothing on the border. And the media outlets are basically saying, oh, okay, he's going to build a wall without doing any sort of background to see what was on the border, and much less the idea of the strategy of prevention through deterrence. The fact that at that moment we were talking about thousands of people dying crossing the border, and that part of people dying, and those numbers are always underestimates, right?
Oh yeah,
right.
5,000, or right now people say 10,000 people have died crossing the border. And then you talk to No More Deaths, with the humanitarian aid organization here in Arizona, and they'll say, well, that number is probably 3 to 10 times more.
Yeah,
because of all the people, the remains that haven't been encountered, and all the families that are still in search of disappeared loved ones. And so the mission of the deaths of people crossing the border, and I think you mentioned, like, you compares to the amount of people that have died in Hurricane Katrina and the 9/11 combined. Now it's like double that, right? And probably possibly even more. And we're talking about a catastrophe that's just completely ignored almost entirely by the media.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to get to more of that in just a minute, but to put a button on the film discussion. So you were editing this film, Ellen. You shoot this really beautiful film that's very empathetic toward the migrant experience. And as you're editing it, as it says in the final piece of the movie, your daughter was tragically killed in a car accident involving an unauthorized migrant. And we've seen so many stories of unauthorized immigrants committing crimes, and we've seen that weaponized and demagogued about. Now, look, I'm a human being. I'm a dad. I'm a flawed person. I can't judge how anybody reacts to that when that happens. What Laken Riley's mother think? Like, I'm in no position to judge anybody else, how that affects their emotions, their psyche, their political views. So that's not, I'm not coming at this from that perspective, but I'm just want to put the question to you. That incident seems to have made you more committed to immigrant justice. It seems to, not only did it not reverse your politics, it seems to make you more passionate about this issue. How did that experience affect you in this way? If you wouldn't mind talking about it, and if you don't want to, that's fine. But
No,
I know
I
you've
don't.
spoken about it before. That's why I asked.
Yeah, I don't mind talking about it. I don't know that it made me more passionate because I already was.
Right.
Leanna and Tad too, but Leanna was quite a big supporter of mine. I remember one day they were in the kitchen and I was editing the part where the Indigenous man breaks down crying, and they both came up and were like, "What's going on here? Why is he crying?" You know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Very interested. I think maybe the fact that I had done so much research and talked to so many people provided me with a little bit of backstory for the driver, whose name was Felix Ortega. One of the things that was not talked about, and I really, really, really wanted people to talk about, was that he was driving so fast on a major artery because he was being chased by the police. So it was a high-speed police chase that was involved. He had been headed out of town, but the police started chasing him, so he made the decision to turn onto Airport Road, and they were stopped at a red light, and he slammed into them. And the officer said the magic words. First of all, he said, "The faster I drove, the faster Felix Ortega drove." And he was surprised at that. And he uttered the magic words. When I realized what was about to happen, I backed off. So he was given a perfunctory in-house what do you call it?
Review.
A review, or something like that.
Investigation.
Yeah, and of course was found blameless. And they weren't the first to die because of with a high-speed police chase involved, nor were they the last. And so nobody wanted to talk about that, you know. And then, if you recall, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder, was sentenced, and was murdered in prison when he was 2 weeks of getting out with an ankle monitor.
Yep. I remember.
No, absolutely no good came from any of it. But I also had he had gone to a church where I had gotten to know the priest and some of the nuns there, and they, I went to them and said, anybody who wants to come to the funeral is welcome, and they told me a little bit about him. He had been in the States since he was about 10, but his English was very poor. They said it seems that maybe he suffered from some sort of undiagnosed bipolar disease. And one woman came up to me at an event and said that her son had been friends with him, and that she thought he had a diabetic episode, that he was diabetic. So, I mean, he was a human being. I mean, would we have been close friends or anything like that? No, I don't think so. But there's a system at play, and it's not a fair one.
Yeah, so I want to get into that with Todd a bit, because Todd, you wrote an article for The Nation in November of last year, of 2023, entitled "Biden's Supposed Open Border Policy Does Not Exist." Now, you insisted that throughout the following year, through the campaign season, the American public would be convinced of the opposite, which it seems that they were. So can you lay out the case you make in the article and how perception conflicts with reality in your mind on this issue of a quote-unquote open border?
Yeah, I think I wrote that article because that sort of mantra of open borders is being just repeated endlessly by, again, to go back to kind of our media criticism by almost all. I mean, it would start in the sort of Fox News realm, but it would then become repeated across the spectrum, and it seemed like that started to dominate the narratives around the border and migration. And when you looked at what Joe Biden had done since he took office, of course he came into office with a number of executive orders, and he campaigned on a promise in 2020 that they were going to enact a more humane, quote unquote, humane border. And in reality, they came in and maintained the same sort of border system that they inherited from Donald Trump, and then began to increase that and then I should say, not only inherited from Donald Trump inherited from Barack Obama, who inherited from George W. Bush, who inherited from Bill Clinton. I want to say all that because it's a very bipartisan buildup of this kind of fortification of the border. And when Biden took the baton, he was kind of taking he was carrying that on. But he came on, they campaigned, as opposed to this year, right? That year in 2020, they're saying, oh, we're going to bring a humane border. And what really happened in those 4 years was a pretty massive continuation of the fortification of the border. And all you have to do is look at the budgets, right? Just all you got to do. There is no open border. I think the budget for Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which are the two main agencies in DHS that do border and immigration enforcement, they were about $24.5 billion when Biden took office. When I wrote that article in 2023, it was $29.8 billion for the 2023 budget. So it had gone up. And interestingly enough, from 2022, it remained plateaued around $24-25 billion. Then all of a sudden it shot up in 2023 to this $29.8 billion. And what does that translate to? Well, that translates to 20,000 Border Patrol agents, a massive surveillance apparatus, including like all kinds of towers, hundreds and hundreds of towers, unattended motion sensors underground, drone systems that are flying overhead, a biometric system that would make probably anyone concerned about privacy very squeamish in the kind of things that they can find out about people in the biometric databases that they have, and a host of other things that is all being developed under the Biden administration. And even though the Biden administration said they would not construct one more, quote unquote, one more foot of wall, they were actively constructing more wall, and they began to construct gaps in what they call, quote unquote, gaps in the wall, and began building processes on the border. I went down and saw it happening, reported on it. The construction companies, they got a nearly $1 billion contract to continue constructing wall and border infrastructure. And so I went from that angle to the private company angle, because there were more contracts doled out to private companies under the Biden administration than any other administration. So
yeah,
Obama
there's a whole section of the article, not to cut you off, but yeah. I do have some stuff here. Sorry to cut you off, but there is a whole section of the article called Biden and the Border Industrial Complex. And I have a couple of slides here for that. So I took a couple pieces of this section. If you count all the contracts for private industry from U.S. Customs and Border Protection and U.S. ICE since Joe Biden took office, 21, 22, and 23, the number comes to $23.5 billion. And though you'd never guess it, given what we normally hear, that already beats Donald Trump's total for his full 4 years in office of $20.9. it's essentially guaranteed that the Biden administration will break all records for paying border contractors, is what you're just talking about. And in truth, if it weren't for the open borders political mania of the moment, this wouldn't be a surprise at all. Remember, while running for president in 2020, Biden received 3 times more campaign contributions than Trump from members of the top companies in the border industry. So I just wanted to point that out because you had written about that, and you detail what some of these contractors are, including like for-profit prisons, CIA airline charter companies, and then, of course, the border infrastructure, which you were talking about. So do you want to talk a little bit specifically about like who these border contractors are, what the border industrial complex is, as you call it?
Yeah, sure. Yes, the numbers are pretty astronomical. Even if you take that $23 billion over 3 years, that's quite a bit of money. If you compare that to, say, what entire border and immigration enforcement budgets were in the 1990s, right, you can see the kind of dramatic increases. And oh man, I wish I had this figure. It's a pretty amazing figure that the contracts given out by CBP and ICE since about 2008, I think it's like 110,000 contracts worth billions. I don't know. I can't remember the exact numbers, so sorry about that. But there's so many contracts that have been given out by DHS, primarily CBP and ICE, that have gone to companies that range from your big military monoliths like Lockheed Martin, like General Dynamics, like Northrop Grumman. Northrop Grumman was working on a new biometric system for CBP, which is called HART, HART, Homeland Advanced Recognition Technology, which can just track like people in all kinds of different ways, and just so many international companies like Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli company, has a contract for surveillance towers, 50 surveillance towers that they just finished constructing in southern Arizona. So the examples are just endless of different companies, and these companies often, particularly the U.S. companies or multinationals, can get behind closed doors in Washington, of course, and really influence Congress people, especially in times around appropriation processes, when budgets are being discussed, to make sure, the budgets are a certain quantity or certain contracts and are contemplated in the budgets. And they also are very active around campaigns. I'm going to do this coming year as kind of an assessment of this most recent campaign to see how many, what kind of campaign contributions came from some top border industry to both the Biden and Trump campaigns. As you mentioned, in 2020, 3-1, it went to Biden from top border industry companies.
Why do you think that is?
It's interesting because in 2016, it went more to Trump than Hillary Clinton, but it was closer to 50-50. A lot of times it is 50-50. It's like the companies can vote for both candidates and say, hey, whoever wins, we win, right? And so I'm curious, like I was expecting it to be 50-50. So when it was 3-1 in favor of Biden, it was kind of surprising. I'm curious to think, I'm wondering, well, did they sense a shift, right? That there's no way Trump was going to win in 2020 in that election, and that, to carry on the project, quote unquote. Maybe. I don't know why. It's hard to know. It's speculation.
Maybe because Biden's rhetoric was softening. They figured they had to pay him more. Maybe that could be something. I don't know.
But given all that, why did you have such mass crossing during the Biden administration? Like that. Well, that's not. I mean, those numbers come out of government sources that there was enormous amounts of border crossing. So why was that if that kind of money was being spent?
Yeah, it was given to the Israelis. That's one. That's one possibility.
No, he's laying out how much money and infrastructure
he
they
said it was an Israeli company that was surveilling. I was like, well, there's your answer there.
Yeah.
You need to ask Todd about how closely aligned Israel and the U.S., how closely they work together on this.
Well, that's one. I mean, that's certainly worth asking. But I am curious about Russell's question too, because at the beginning of Biden's term, we heard all these stories that seemed to suggest what you're saying, which is that the border was more closed. We saw the
Right.
migrant detention centers, which are called cages under Trump, and detention centers under Biden. They were overcrowded to the point where the Mexican migrant detention centers were becoming overcrowded. We had you on. We brought Ellin on to do a segment about the fire that took place in an overcrowded center. And then it seems like crossings increased, despite, like, I don't doubt anything you're saying. They've definitely made these investments. It's definitely not open in the sense that no one gets caught and they're not very cruel to people who they catch. But there do seem to be more crossings. So how do we reconcile that? What do you think about that?
Well, the way that they determine the number of crossings is by apprehensions. So they're looking at arrest numbers, right? So
Right.
how so that almost defies the point in a certain way. And also when you're thinking about crossings and motivations for why people cross, it was during also the Title 42, Title 42 is of course the pandemic era rapid expulsion policy. So people would cross and then be immediately returned to Mexico, with no formal deportation process. And then people come back, right? So there is probably people, or I know that there were people that were counted multiple times. There's also, like, when thinking about crossings, there's so many different factors that have to be considered. The different things that are going on, like there's environmental catastrophes in Central America, and particularly Guatemala and Honduras in 2021, which caused, I think it was about 1.5 million people were displaced due to flooding and all kinds of other things. So there's all kinds of different things. There's the whole migrant system roots, shifted. It became more international at one point. You have to consider, like, what's going on in Europe and why are so many people from different continents coming up through Latin America to the United States border. And then the fact that these apprehensions did actually go down in the last year quite considerably. There's so many different different facets of analysis to look into this, and one is just the ebbs and flows of people and the reasons why they come. Like, that's what I think Ellin's film does so well, is looks at those issues of why people come, and really consider that. Well, that's another thing. Like, people are just coming, but they come out of, it's like as if they come out of some sort of vacuum, and that they just appear at the border. Like, there's not real reasons why they're coming, why people are coming. And so I think that just deserves, I'm just throwing out a lot of things right now. I think that deserves a very thoughtful analysis and unpacking that that goes more deeper into it than this kind of how it's being thrown at the media wall, right? Like, all these people are coming, and and then it goes into this open border narrative, and it's far from that. It's precisely the opposite. People are getting arrested and deported, and in fact, during Biden's 4 years, there's 4.5 million deportations. That topped Trump who's during his 4 years, there's 1.5 million. So that's 3 million more than Trump under Biden in terms of deportations. Which I think if that would have gone those 8 years, Biden might have taken over Trump as deporter in chief.
So do you think that could have something to do with the fact that people thought Biden would be softer on migration than Trump was? And because Trump would say at the time, well, we're using family separation as a deterrent to warn people not to come. And then Biden runs on a more humane border. Do you think that could spark more people coming north, just thinking it's going to be easier to get through and it's going to be an easier time for them if they do get caught?
I mean, I can give my thought. Ellin, do
Sure,
you want to?
Yeah, whoever wants to go. Yeah, absolutely.
No, I don't. You know, we've had just since my first round of filming in 2008, there's been the coup d'etat in Honduras. And, you know, all those kids that, how many was it, Todd, from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala? It was tens of thousands.
From 2014.
Kids.
You're talking the
Yes,
unaccompanied minors.
that year. Yes, 2014. I mean, and then the climate disaster. I mean, people don't leave everything they've ever known, the people that they know and care about, because they heard somewhere that it'd be. I just don't. I don't buy that logic.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, they don't do it without having
Yeah.
a very good reason,
Right.
but they may be more likely to do it if they expect more humane treatment. Like if they have reason to believe the juice is going to be worth the squeeze, rather than
Yeah.
just they're going to be brutalized and sent right back.
Yeah, I mean, Todd would probably have a better answer than I do on that.
I mean, like, I agree with what Ellen's saying, but I also think that, like, Trump got so much media coverage, and his messaging around it just was so amplified constantly.
Right,
Like,
right.
Binions again, right? And then all of a sudden Biden's coming in and saying, "Oh, we're going to have a humane border." I mean, that sort of
Right.
messaging does travel
Yeah.
around.
That's true.
I mean, it seems to me that if you're contemplating it, and there's so many more real reasons, right? Based on why you would, like Ellen said, you know, why you would
Right.
leave your
Sure.
communities. But if it seems like this might be a soft spot, you know, maybe, you know, it could. I think maybe in the first year I would think that, but beyond that, when it was quite evident that the border is the same, like people are crossing, they're getting deported, the same kind of brutalization of people, to put it frankly, continued to happen. I would think that sort of messaging, whatever the messaging was coming from Biden in 2020, was subverted by, you know, reality, and how the messaging that actually what happens to people is what travels more quickly, because they're telling your families and the communities and everything else.
All right, so I have one more question for you guys, and then we're just going to read some comments from the chat. We have some super chats and some rumble rants. Thank you for sending those, guys. So I have one more question for you guys before we go to that, and this is a multimedia question. So Donald Trump had a press conference today where he got the question, basically, in terms of your mass deportation plans, have you had any preliminary discussions with Venezuela? So the question is basically asking, in this case, Venezuela, will they play ball with your mass deportation plans? Will they take some of these migrants back? And this is what he has to say.
In terms of your mass deportation plans, have you had any preliminary discussions with countries like Venezuela, from where the Tren de Aragua gang is now popping up?
They'll take them back.
They're going to take them back?
They're all taking them back, yep. And if they don't, they'll be met very harshly economically. Okay, they'll all take them back. You know, Venezuela and other countries were not behaving very well with us during my administration, and within 24 hours they were behaving very well. They'll all take them back.
Okay, so they'll all take them back. He seems awful confident. So, Todd,
Mexico was going to build the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Mexico's going to pay for the wall. So, you know, Todd, I read some of your most recent Substack piece here, which was a Q&A with David Bacon, where you kind of get into whether or not this mass deportation plan is implementable. What do you think? I mean, there's obviously a lot of business interests that don't want mass deportation for reasons very similar to what we saw in the film. Do you think he's going to be able to do this? Do you think he's going to try to do this? A mass deportation going beyond like people who've committed violent crimes and the like?
I don't think he's able to do it. I mean, I think that, like, in that David Bacon piece, David Bacon, of course, has decades of analysis around labor, looking through a labor lens, and especially migrant labor. And the way he breaks it down, you know, the U.S. economy is so dependent on migrant labor that there's
Right.
just no way that they could do a mass deportation. Like like just now in the clip, he's like, it's going to be harsh economic consequences. Well, the harsh economic consequences are if you do a mass deportation of pretty much, the labor, the labor that's picking what I think in that article, I think it's 52% of
more
people
than half.
in the
You don't feel that a nation of keyboard warriors who haven't seen daylight since the Obama administration are going to go pick strawberries?
Yeah, right.
I don't think the Americans are going to take those jobs.
I think there was a really good point in the second cooler about like the people that are behind their keyboards, maybe not, but there's probably, I mean, if there were if the salaries are high enough if somebody broke it down, like if the salaries are too low, right? That's the problem. And if the salaries were a little bit more just, then maybe probably a lot more people might take those jobs. I don't know, Ellen, do you have something?
Well, as Mary Bauer pointed out, she was with the Southern Poverty Law Center when I interviewed her, and she had authored a report called Close to Slavery. And she makes the very good point that you go down into the Black Belt of Alabama, one of the poorest, made poor, kept poor, predominantly Black areas in the nation, which also had just several years prior experienced Hurricane Katrina, where people were displaced and so forth and so on. And she really points out that they don't want those workers. The employers don't want those workers. They want a guest worker that they can abuse. They want that.
When I was in New Orleans last winter, we did that segment. I went to an event where it was really an event about incarceration, but they also had a Latino speaker who had come up as an immigrant and said, we didn't understand we were being brought in to rebuild after Katrina to take those jobs at a lower wage from the contractor who had gotten the rebuilding, and that we were displacing these local Black workers. We didn't realize how we were being set against that workforce.
They're Black, they're white, they're Cajun, but when they advertise, yes, they have these laws in place that the corporation has to advertise, but their idea of advertising is to take a 3x5 card and say, we're hiring, and put it up in a window. Nobody sees it.
Right, sure.
A, B, the employers don't want them.
Right.
They want people that they can exploit, that they can underpay, that they can shake down. I asked Miguel Montalvo, who's the lawyer that spoke, he had represented some of those clients in the lawsuits, and I'm sorry to say, died very suddenly about 5 years ago, but his wife also was a lawyer in that field. And I talked to her and I said, have you ever heard what happened to those cases? How were they settled? One was the man who got sprayed with pesticides. He had been working in tobacco in North Carolina. Others were in the orange groves of Florida, and some of the others were in the vegetables in southwestern Georgia. And she said, unless you can tell me exactly what the style was, there have been so many lawsuits that I can't tell you what the outcome was. So they're getting sued, but I don't know that anybody, what comes of of the settlements and the, you know, the judgments.
And the last question I have regarding that Trump clip there, aside from the feasibility of mass deportation, where he talks about Venezuela, a sovereign nation, as having not behaved very well until he took office, and then he behaved very well. You know, this is why I think we've talked a lot on this show about how, yes, there did seem to be a lot of deep state maneuvering against Trump throughout his first run and his first term and then his second run. But ultimately, I think where you come down on it is he still believes in American domination. He still believes we have the God-given right to just dominate other countries. And I think these three-letter agencies feel the same way at the end of the day. They may not like his manners, but they feel the same way. So as someone who has, as two of you guys who have really studied this issue, to threaten sanctions against Venezuela in response to a migrant crisis seems just to be completely moronic. Isn't that going to create more of a migrant crisis?
I'll pass the baton to Todd.
I mean, he did that with Mexico in his last term. He threatened to levy a bunch of tariffs unless Mexico would harden its border enforcement on its southern border with Guatemala. So it's definitely in step with, you know, what Trump has done before. And I totally agree. The whole, you know, American domination, and I mean, I immediately think of like the Monroe Doctrine when you think about Latin America, right? United States rules Latin America. I also think about Manifest Destiny, you know, this sort of quote unquote God-given right of the United States to dominate or take over territory. So you see that. I see kind of a tactic of Trump that if you don't do, like, I will discipline you or I'll at least threaten to discipline you if you don't do what I say. And it's almost like the mass deportation thing too. Like, I don't think it's possible that he can do what like 20 million people or 50 million people. It's but what he'll do is he'll make a show of it at first. Like, he will make a show of it, make sure the cameras are out there. He's going to make a show of him talking to other countries as well, like Venezuela, probably like Mexico, or any other country that doesn't fall in line with U.S. interests, which then it just becomes a continuation of centuries of U.S. power in Latin America and in certain respects.
All right.
Not to mention the doctrine of discovery.
All righty. Well, we're going to go to some quick chats from the audience. Kat Terrell says, thanks, guys. Thanks, Kat Terrell. Sparky says, great comprehensive documentary. Sparky, enjoy the documentary.
Thank you, Sparky.
It means a lot. Yes, you guys are chat pals. Everybody's chat pals here. That's right. Although you hang out more in the Rumble chat nowadays, Ellen, right, than in the YouTube chat. But actually,
a lot of our folks have migrated over there.
Go over to Rumble. Yeah. So now I hang out with the Rumble chatters.
Yeah, but actually, Sparky splits his time, so you still know Sparky.
Okay.
That's right.
Well, I know Sparky.
There you go. Sparky says every member of every branch of government should watch it. That's a high compliment.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you.
He's a fan. He says maybe there's not a perfect solution, but there's certainly ways to exponentially improve things. Sparky continues, working conditions for U.S. citizens have gone downhill for decades, so went proportionally for non-citizens. Not tying H-2A visas to a single employer would help a lot. What do you think about that?
Well, let me say something about that, because there's been talk of, with agriculture, creating a portable visa, that if they come over and the conditions are not what they were promised, they can go to another employer as long as they stay in agriculture. But in my mind, that moves us from indentured servitude to serfdom. When you tie somebody to that, and what are the odds that somebody who is working out in these fields where they're living in rundown company housing and, you know, all of these conditions, that they're going to take that visa and go somewhere. No.
Alrighty. Sparky continues, if Biden solved the border problem, there'd be no work for contractors. It would help if company presidents and CEOs weren't a bunch of psychopaths and sociopaths. You're right about that, Sparky. Thank you.
Yeah. That's the trick, ain't it?
Absolutely. So over on the Rumble side, we got Ken Texican for $25. Can't watch Second Cooler and not think of On the Waterfront's priest, played by Carl Malden, when the sling gets dropped on one of the union dock workers about to testify against the mob boss of the union. Maiden's father's Barry's least of my brothers, last rites sacrament administered on the dock worker, challenges every American that knows the truth and says nothing on behalf of Gazans and our brothers that are coming up from south of the border. What are we doing about regulating the day traders, vulture capitalists, lying ass politicians, etc.? Well, thank you, Ken Texican.
All right, I'll tell you something fun if you're a fan of that movie. So that movie was rushed into production to catch the headline scandal because a newspaper reporter worked for the New York Sun, defunct now, but it was a very big paper at the time. It's actually the newspaper that published the Yes, Virginia, There Was a Santa Claus op-ed that we get that from. They revealed what any New Yorker knew, but the rest of the country didn't, that the mafia ran all those ports in New York. The New York local was known as the pistol local. It was 80% ex-convicts. So it was a huge national scandal. They had Senate subcommittee hearings. So if you know a lot about that piece of history, when you watch On the Waterfront, a lot of the events in that movie are directly referencing that scandal, which was still ongoing at the time that movie was released.
Interesting. M. Samba, thank you for showing this informative documentary and for the enlightening discussion, a topic about which many people are unaware.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, M. Samba. Appreciate that. And yeah, that's why I wanted to have you both on. I wanted to show this film again because one of the things that was really frustrating about the campaign is that the Democrats just basically made Trump's position the center of this issue. They just completely ceded the argument. And there was no debate about this at all, no discussion about this at all. And it's so weird because in 2016, the metaphor for what a xenophobe and a racist and a fascist Trump was his wall. And Kamala's featuring his wall in her campaign ads. She's putting his wall in her ads. And so it was like all of a sudden, we're just, I guess this issue is just, just done now. It's over. We're not going to talk about this. This is just a settled matter. Like it seemed so strange to me that, this issue now that it's been so spotlighted, that there seems to have been a real stifling of debate about it. And so that's why I wanted to do this with you guys. So thank you for joining. We got a couple more. Ken Texican, thanks for the $50. We owe you two cowbells, Ken Texican. Russell doesn't have his cowbell with him because he's in his other room. Hey, we have a virtual cowbell. That's what we got this for. That's what we got.
Yeah, there we go.
For.
There we go.
There it is.
I'm looking around. I mean, I don't have anything that'll serve, really.
There you go. We did it virtually for you, Ken Texican. What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do this Christmas season? He sure wouldn't be concerned with gift exchanges, while Genocide Joe's version of Christmas Midnight Mass speaks more to aiding and abetting mass murder of babies in Gaza and beyond. Absolutely. Sparky says, On the Waterfront is great, Keaton. You should watch it sometime. I know you millennials are allergic to black and white. No, I've seen the movie. I didn't know the backstory that you were talking about. But yeah, I've seen the movie. Yeah, no, that's a great one. Movie lovers gotta watch that one. All right. Well, thank you, Ellin and Todd, both so much for joining us. You can find Ellin. She's got a Substack now, ellin.substack.com. How'd you get that one? It must have been a tough one to land. You were lucky. That was free. Just plain old Ellin. I guess you're the first Ellin to have one.
I don't know. I don't think I had much to do with it. I think that's the people decided it. But I have not been producing.
Oh, that's all right. You've got it there, so you can go sign up for that. And then Todd, you're at the Border Chronicle. That's a Substack publication as well, correct?
Yes, it is. Yep.
All right. So you guys got any final words, any final plugs, anything you're working on now that you want to get to?
I want y'all to get this book and read it.
Empire of
Empire
Borders.
of
All right.
Borders, the expansion of the U.S. border around the world. It will blow your mind.
All right.
Todd
Look,
and I
Todd,
talked about,
you got a manager.
Yeah, there you go.
Todd and I talked about trying to turn this into a documentary, but I realized I would never raise the money to do it the way I want to. But
It's
you need
hard.
to
How
read
long
this
did it take
book.
to shoot that? Like, how long were you filming that one for?
What, the second
Yeah,
cooler?
the second cooler. It was a lot of interviews. I mean, you had a lot of people.
Oh my
involved.
gosh, we just stacked them up one on top of the other. So it really probably added up to 8 weeks of shooting.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty busy
Yeah.
schedule to get all that done in 8 weeks. That's a lot for sure.
Well, the shooting. Yeah.
The shooting
Right.
and then
Well,
the
then
editing
obviously
and
the
all that
editing
other
is
stuff.
the big part of it.
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah.
that's the most.
I mean, literally, we would
most
just
time-consuming task.
one
Yeah.
after the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was exhausting. But when you're paying a shooter $1,000 a day,
Damn.
Wow.
it's like,
Yeah.
come in here and get that camera running.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Time is money. That's right. Sparky, thanks for the donation. Rather than a barrier, the wall should be the seam that binds the neighboring culturally related countries together. Oh, that's a nice sentiment, Sparky. Thank you.
We
For
should get Roger Waters down there like he did for the Berlin Wall. Do
Well,
a
yeah,
concert.
That's a good idea.
that is a good idea.
He might do that. I'd be surprised if nobody's ever pitched him that.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
we should
Well, maybe that's where you come in. Russell.
Yeah, if we can get to him.
Y'all are getting so big. I'm sure he knows who y'all are.
We'll see. We have some people. We know people who know him.
There
We
you
do know
go.
some people who
pitch
know
it to
him.
him and see
Go.
what tell us what he
Yeah.
says.
We'll see
Yeah.
what we could do. Alrighty, well, Todd Miller and Ellin Jimmerson, thank you both so much for making time. Congratulations, Ellen, on the film again. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much.
yeah, absolutely. We're so happy we could do this. Great to meet you both. We'd love to talk to you again sometime soon.
Great. Thank you for having us on.
Alrighty.
Thanks for
Beautiful.
coming out, guys. Great
Thank
work.
you both. Great work. Absolutely. All right, Todd Miller and Ellin Jimmerson, everybody. That was great that we could put that together. Ken Texican for another $5. Thanks, Ken Texican. Says 8 weeks of shooting. What's that cost the taxpayers in Ukraine? Yes. Yes. Yes.
Don't forget, tomorrow we have the one, the only Jimmy Dore to discuss the TYT shuffle that they've been doing of late, and a few other fun subjects. I'm finally going to pull out that Rescue the Republic footage where I interviewed the MAGA for Palestine people and get his reaction to it. That footage, I just watched it. It's pretty. We should have dropped it. I just never got around to it. Maybe we'll drop it Sunday. We have the contact for that woman. Like, we should have her on.
All right. Cool. She drops some lines in the chat every now and then too.
Oh, does she?
Yeah.
Do you know how to get her? Because I couldn't find that email. I looked.
I have to go back and see. What
She was
chat-
very interesting. Her son's a Marine.
Okay.
Yeah, she was an ex-con, which I can say because she said it on camera. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
no,
I
she
gotta
was
see.
she was a character, man. She was interesting.
I gotta see what her chat name is. I'll go back. I'll try to find one of the episodes where she sent us a chat, and I'll see what her handle is. Maybe we can find her through there. Sparky says, Ellen, my cousin retired from the Redstone Arsenal and Marshall Space Center. That's right. You're a Southerner too, Sparky. All righty. Well, folks, thank you very much for being in here tonight. We're glad we could do this. It was a great time, and we hope you guys all enjoyed it. Yes, we are back at 2 p.m. tomorrow with special guest Jimmy Dore, sometimes host of the Jimmy Dore Show when we are not available. That's what we're going to be him tomorrow. Yes. Thank you guys very much for being here. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Todd. Thank you all. We will see you tomorrow for the regularly scheduled 2 p.m. show with JD joining us for the entirety of that show. So that's going to be a fun one. We'll see you then, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. Until we see you tomorrow, be safe, be well.
Friends, Romans,
Yeah.
countrymen, courage.
Please clap.